I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. So if you're listening to this, clearly you have the goal, the intention to do the right thing for your health. But there are so many mixed messages out there, and we're often spending our time, our energy, and our money focusing on things that don't really matter. So the headlines out there, the studies, they can be incredibly confusing and really derail us from what's the important stuff to focus on. So today, I am really excited. I'm sitting down with Dr. Rich Milani. I'll let him introduce himself, but he and I are going to dive into what matters, what to focus on, what to make a priority. So we're going to be talking everything from sodium, what's the real deal on that, to coconut oil, cholesterol, to carbs, what the science tells us. So welcome, Dr. Milani.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks for having me.
So you have so many experiences, titles, so let me just let you do it.
Well, I guess for the purposes of this, I'm a physician. I trained initially in internal medicine, and I think the area of training that really allows me to speak about the subject we're about to talk about is I trained in preventive medicine and clinical epidemiology, and this was at Harvard. And in fact, there was a period of time that if you went to Harvard Medical School, I was your nutrition instructor. Rather.
Really?
But this was quite some time ago.
That shouldn't surprise me, but I didn't know that.
No. So, but preventive medicine is all about kind of what we're focusing on today, and that's sort of what I spent my life doing. And I focus more on the cardiovascular side, but I do spend a lot of time on the cancer prevention side as well as other things too. And anyways, that's my background.
And your role with Oxford Health System?
Right now, my role is I'm the Chief Clinical Transformation Officer. And you'll say, well, what the heck is that? And my job is basically to develop innovative new programs and strategies and workflows that can transform our health systems to how we need to be treating people in the future, which is hopefully to improve their health over time and reduce their need for health systems over time, and to really revolutionize how we manage care delivery over time.
And your role, I feel, every year continues to evolve, to change, and there's always something new that you're creating, you're developing that comes to fruition.
Well, I hope some come to fruition. We certainly do a lot of things in a lot of areas, both hospital care, outpatient care. There's a whole variety of areas we put our nose under the tent, so to speak. But yeah, we try and make a difference where we can. And I think we've done some good work thus far.
So when we're looking at diving into these things, these areas that there's so much confusion around it, having you here as an expert in this, and kind of we're both very passionate about nutrition and wellness. When we're at different things in the community and the public, at work functions, I think both of our heads spin at the same things. We go, I can't believe they're serving this, or why do we have these things here? And it isn't, unfortunately, part of our mainstream always to have nutrition there. So diving into the hot button issue of sodium.
Yes.
Tell me with this, what's the deal with salt? People, whether they have hypertension or not, are often very fearful of sodium, of salt, but not everyone needs to be.
Yeah, there's the two most common conditions, I think, where salt or sodium plays a role is high blood pressure, hypertension, which is the really most common condition, and then after that, heart failure. And for many people, these are what we call salt-sensitive conditions, where if you potentially consume too much sodium in the diet or salt in the diet, we'll say them interchangeably here, then it could worsen the condition. But the flip side is that not everybody with high blood pressure is what we call salt-sensitive. So there are people with high blood pressure that are salt insensitive and people with high blood pressure that are salt sensitive. And what that means is that for those that are salt insensitive, having some sodium in their diet, they don't have to be quite as concerned about, managing the sodium intake as much as the people that are salt sensitive. The same thing is true with heart failure, but maybe to a little more lenient extent. But, we worry about, I think any of us that are just, have had too much salt and they went to bed, they don't have to maybe urinate as much or things like that because it just retains
You see it,
water.
you feel it, your eyes are
You
puffy,
feel it,
your
your
rings are
eyes are
tight.
puffy, exactly. So then the water's showing up elsewhere,
Right.
but it's being absorbed into the system, and that is true. And that doesn't mean you're salt sensitive or salt insensitive, but in patients with heart failure, we don't want them to retain too much fluid on board because it could lead to putting them into heart failure. So really the condition where we're a little more lax on sodium in the diet is in high blood pressure. Certainly for people without high blood pressure, and they don't have elevated pressures, sodium is even much less concerning than other things that one needs to be concerned about in the diet.
So how does someone know if they're salt sensitive or not?
Well, therein lies the problem, because the only way truly you can know, it's time consuming and not inexpensive. The tests that have to be done is literally we bring you into a metabolic laboratory, we measure your blood pressures, and then we load you with saline, which is basically salt water in your veins. And then we see what happens to your blood pressure. And again, obviously, those things just aren't something you could just do willy-nilly to find out.
How long of a process? How long is that window that someone's in there?
It's not long. I mean, it's not like you're in the hospital overnight or anything. You could probably do the entire test in, several hours.
But you'd have to talk with your physician, get it scheduled. Insurance probably doesn't usually cover it.
Well, first of all, there's probably very few cities in the country that even offer it. So it's not like you could just go up to any doctor's office and say, hey, I want to get a salt sensitive test. It doesn't happen. So you'd really need a metabolic laboratory to do it right, which obviously most places don't have. I don't think insurance would cover this. So I'm giving you an answer that
Right.
it's going to be unfortunately impractical for people to be able to follow. I guess the only sort of poor man's way one could pull it off would be, and obviously I don't feel good about recommending this, but you can consume something that maybe you would worry about that would be high in sodium. Let's say you're giving up something that you really enjoy that has a moderate amount of sodium in it, let's say, and you could take your blood pressure before and during and after and seeing what happened to it. And obviously if you had that meal and it didn't really make a difference in your blood pressure, and you did it a couple times maybe, and you didn't see a difference or it going up significantly, then you could probably conclude that you're sodium insensitive and that you can get away with it.
So, and I've actually had clients do that when there
Yes.
are things that, for whatever reason, maybe they're restricting more than we think that they should. And okay, but doing it in a very controlled way. And like you said, checking it before, checking it, maybe not while you're eating, but right before.
No.
How long? So someone is doing this and they say, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and use that soy sauce on my sushi that I don't usually
Right.
use or whatever. How long after they consume salt, and maybe at that high salt meal, do they continue to monitor that blood pressure?
Yeah, I would probably do it, if I were to try and do it, let's say it was my wife and she wanted to do it, and I'd probably check the pressure every 20 to 30 minutes, for a few hours,
Okay.
and just to see what it did. I mean, it's probably not going to have much of an effect 6 hours later, but generally we would look at this, 3 to 4 hours out, up to, every, twice or 3 times an hour for several hours.
And what percent of people who have hypertension are not sensitive to sodium?
That varies in the literature.
Yeah.
It's anywhere from half to 2/3
That's what I've, that's what
are
I've-
not sensitive to sodium. So obviously, since we don't have a good way of discriminating, the recommendations are,
Across
listen,
the
all you
board.
people, just be concerned about this and try and reduce the sodium if you can.
And so many times the high salt foods are not good for us anyway. It's
Correct.
not, if you're putting soy sauce on your salmon, sushi, or you're adding something to your otherwise really nutritious food, that's one thing. But a lot of the high salt things are fast food, high processed carbs, stuff we shouldn't be having anyway.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's something that I think that if someone has the means to see if they are salt sensitive, I really like to say, okay, let's focus on the things that matter. And again, not to encourage someone to go eat a whole bunch of salt. That's not what this is about. But if you did enjoy some
nuts
Yes.
maybe that are healthy for you, and
Exactly.
you just like a little salt on them, and it makes them more flavorful, or edamame or something where you have a little salt on edamame, which is very good, soybeans, then, that'd be
Check it out.
fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be cool.
And I think the people who have been diagnosed with hypertension, many of you would have a blood pressure cuff at home or access to one. So that's not a hard thing to do, and just kind of every 20, 30 minutes for a few hours. So I think that that's very eye-opening for people because that is something that immediately someone receives that diagnosis and they think everything's got to change. And it may, but it may not. And then again, if you are going to cut your salt out or down, cut it, choose to drop those foods that aren't so good for us anyway.
Right.
Um, what about carbs versus fats? As a cardiologist, this is something that you hear all the time, I'm sure. People go fat-free. They're trying to do the right thing for their heart, but they cut everything out.
Yeah, I think, sometimes we go overboard in one direction too much, and I think this is one of those cases. Now, let me make sure I start off by saying, we got to be very careful about fat, and particularly saturated fat and trans fats. Those are obviously the most harmful forms of fat. So we don't want to overboard on fried chicken and anything else that's going to be high in these type of fried and saturated fats. But with that said, fats are important, and we need fats. And obviously, what we would prefer to do is consume fats that are healthier fats than those that are less healthy. So polyunsaturated fats, omega-3 fats, monounsaturated fats, even some medium chain triglyceride fats. Those kind of things are going to be much healthier than trans fatty acids or pure saturated fat. So I would avoid recommending to anybody they go fat-free. I think that's a mistake. And obviously, the other good thing about fat is that it's satiating. In other words, it fills you up. It makes you feel full, which is typically a good thing. It stops you from eating, whereas most other components of foods rarely have that effect. Fats are high in calories, but they're important in terms of all our
Hormone
cells are
production,
made
right.
from fats. I mean, we still need fats for building, the things that we need to build to maintain ourselves from a cellular perspective. So we've gone a little bit overboard on carbs, particularly simple carbs. I'll never complain about having too much fruit. So complex carbs are a different story, but simple carbs and, all the breads and the fast food, stuff that we consume and the sugars and the candies and so forth are really doing us a lot of harm in terms of just, non-nutritious calories that just add a lot of non-value to us other than, just giving us tons of calories without much nutrition. So I would rather us increase a little bit of fat consumption, ideally a good type of fat, and reduce a lot of the unnecessary, simple carbohydrates that often accompany a lot of the typical American and Western diets that we see today.
And so when you say polyunsaturated fats, we would look at our oilier fish. So our salmon, for example, our tuna, halibut, monounsaturated fats being avocado, olive oil, kind of putting it into foods for people. These are things that, plant-based fats, yes, and then fish-based oils, and then supplementing with fish oil.
Yeah, the whole fish oil supplement thing has been if there's an area that's got a lot of mixed messages, that's one of them. And people are going to say, well, why? And the answer is not all fish oil is the same. And I don't want to make this into a long lesson, but let's just cut to the chase. So the beneficial fats that are what are considered in fish oil are two: eicosapentaenoic acid, which is a 20 carbon fatty acid.
And that'll be listed on a label of a supplement as EPA.
EPA, correct. And then DHA, or docosahexaenoic acid, which is a 22 carbon fatty acid. Those are the DHA is the longest chain fatty acid in man, known to man. If you look at the human body, and we were to just dissect the human body and say, well, does this exist in our bodies? The answer is yes. Your brain is made mostly. If you take the water out of our brains, it's mostly DHA. And it's you find DHA, this highly complex fatty acid, in brains, retina, and in the heart. Those are three areas where we see the highest concentration of DHA. It's very important in neonatal brain development. In fact, if you look at mother's milk coming from the breast, not milk coming out of the store, so if we took breast milk, human breast milk, it's mostly all DHA. And that's important in brain development for all of us. So, and again, where you see DHA a lot in the body is areas that have a lot of high signal transmission. So brains, hearts, retinas have high areas of signal transmission, and that's where DHA is critical. So EPA is also very important because it creates a whole series of compounds that are anti-inflammatory and anti-thrombotic. What that means is that it tends to reduce inflammation and reduce clotting. There's other complementary compounds that promote inflammation and promote clotting. And the answer is you don't want just one or the other. You need a balance of the two. And if you look at human history, going back 40,000 years up until maybe the early 1900s, it was about a 50-50 balance between the two of these polyunsaturated fats that come from plants versus polyunsaturated types of oils that come from the sea. And then only in the last 100, 150 years have we seen a predominance more of the corn oil type stuff against the stuff that is from the sea, and that we've created an imbalance in favor of inflammation and thrombosis. And if you look at the diseases that we suffer from, these are diseases primarily of inflammation and thrombosis, interestingly enough, so they go hand in hand.
And give us some examples of those if someone's listening, because they may be like, oh, wait, that's me.
Yeah, so heart attacks, that's a disease of inflammation and thrombosis. Strokes, those are diseases very often, depending on the type of stroke, of inflammation and thrombosis. Even certain types of other type of inflammatory diseases we see.
Arthritis.
Exactly. Are diseases often in inflammation and thrombosis. So many of the common stuff that we suffer from, even certain types of cancer, are hallmarked by that. And then we see, again, this imbalance that can help sort of push in that direction. So, these fats, basically nutrition in general has an important role in many diseases that we may or may not ever get in life. And we have direct control over what we put in our mouths. But certainly these type of fats are critical. So obviously we would recommend, seafood. Now, back to the supplement issue, which is where we got off on, they can have a supplement that's got a very low concentration of one of these two types of fats, and it may not be enough to do anything. And so they say the supplement failed. It may not have enough of the beneficial oil. Where we've seen the greater benefits has been in studies that use supplements that have high concentrations of EPA and DHA, typically the combined amount of 700 milligrams daily or more. And that's where we've seen some real benefits in terms of less atrial fibrillation, which is a heart rhythm problem. We've seen less heart failure issues. We've seen either, reduction in cardiovascular events. But where the greatest benefit has been seen has been in dietary studies that have focused on the Mediterranean style diet. And again, the Mediterranean style diet is one that's high in, the kind of things that you and I promote a lot, which is high in these type of oils. Seafood is the predominant source of meat, protein. Lots of fruits, lots of vegetables, low in saturated fat, but not low necessarily in fats. It's just high in the right amount of fat, and fruit basically with every meal. And we've seen reductions in not only heart attacks, but we've seen reductions in cancer.
So getting the omega-3s through the real food when possible.
Yes.
And in supplements, if someone's listening, well, how do I know if my supplement is right? You turn the label over, and it'll tell you on the front, it might say 1,000 milligrams, but that's just the weight of the capsule. A lot of times there's other oils or fillers in there. So you see 1,000 milligram capsule of fish oil and you think you're good to go. You might not be. So turn that label over and it'll tell you on the label DHA, EPA. Make sure you're looking at how many servings.
That was the thing I was going to say. The first thing I tell people is, what is the serving size? Because that's how they trick you.
Oh, sometimes
it'll be 2 or 3 or 4 tablets is one serving.
6 on some of them. Who's going to take 6?
Exactly. And what you'd like to see is the serving size is 1 capsule. And then you want to say, okay, now that I know how much is in 1 capsule, how much of that is EPA and DHA, to your point?
Add them up, and at least I usually say 1,000 or more, and so 700 or more. But looking at those to know that you've got a really good quality product. And there's a bunch of different brands. That Nordic Naturals is one that's in stores. It's pricey. The one that I usually recommend. There's a whole bunch of them out there, but.
Carlson is one that I've used a lot over the years. They make a high concentrate EPA and DHA. It's mail order, but it's a good quality, and it's not as expensive as some of the stores.
Yes, so those are they are out there, and if someone is having fishy burps, you probably have a not great quality product. Also, so looking at that, and they do have some that are lemon flavored and all these others.
Yeah, I would say that when all of us have gone to a fish market, and some of you may eat sushi. If you actually go to a good sushi bar and it smells really good. It doesn't smell. The bad smell that you get from fish is due to rancidity, and rancidity occurs when the oils, literally the same oils we're talking about, break down. They break down in the sunlight over time, and then it turns into this nasty fish smell that none of us like. So if you if you belch, it doesn't mean you have a necessarily bad quality. But if you belch and it's sushi smelling, that's good. And if you break open a capsule and it smells like fresh sushi, if you know what sushi, it smells great. And if it smells rancid, then you got a bad product. And that's one of the reasons why you want to keep them in the dark or, in an opaque bottle so it doesn't get sunlight. What I've told people is if they are burping and it's something they don't like, just drink it with cold water versus hot coffee, because it'll go further down the digestive tract
before it's dissolving. Yeah. I've had some people tell me they put them in the freezer.
Oh, well, that's an option.
Yeah. I haven't tried swallowing the frozen pill, but it works for some who really struggle with that. And when we're talking about inflammation being such a root of it, and then these healthier fats, the fish oils having that anti-inflammatory effect. And we talked earlier about, sugar or carbs versus fat. And so many people have, for years, especially through the 90s and beyond, were very low fat and upped their carbs. Those carbs and sugars are incredibly inflammatory. And when we look at inflammation being at the root of so many of these conditions that you just said, we were doing the opposite that our body needed, really.
Yeah, I think what we've learned really over the last, not even that long, I mean, honestly, probably the last 5 to 10 years, is the critical role that the microbiome plays in our health. So,
and tell people what that means.
And what is that? So that's the bacteria that live in us and on us. Okay, so mostly when we think of the microbiome, it's all the bacteria that live in our guts. And it turns out that we have a very symbiotic relationship, and we need them. In fact, they do a lot of the work in digestion, in processing, and cellular functions that allow us to live. So it's not like, oh my God, I wish I didn't have any bacteria. You actually want bacteria to be able to do a good job. The question is, what you want is the right bacteria, not the wrong bacteria. And so your diet controls what the right and wrong is. These bacteria, given the wrong diet, produce all kinds of horrible things, some of which are toxic, that cause disease. They can cause inflammation. They can cause direct, disease states, including heart attacks and other problems, even cancer. So it turns out that there used to be a commercial a gazillion years ago for, I forgot, it was some kind of margarine or something. And it was, there was this woman that would come on and she was the impersonation of Mother Nature. And it was, it's not good to fool Mother Nature. I don't know if you remember what that was. It was some spread or something. But the point is that, you don't want to fool with Mother Nature. So Mother Nature really never intended us to have a diet of McDonald's, so to speak, or fast food, I should say, and soda.
You know what? In hindsight, I think it was a margarine. You can't fool Mother Nature. But she was a margarine that was full of trans fats.
Yeah, exactly. Right? No, it was a good analogy for a bad product. But the point is that she was right. You don't want to fool Mother Nature. It's just that, unfortunately, in that case, endorsing the wrong stuff. But you want to eat real food. And the more processing that we add to this food and the more, overload of carbohydrates, which is not how we evolved over time. We evolved mostly on plants and, believe it or not, seafood over time.
With the diets that have come out, so many people are doing keto diet. They're doing low carb diet. And, I know that some of that, is frustrating because of the higher animal fats, and you don't love that. One thing that I do appreciate about a lower carb diet or even a keto diet is I do think people's fear of fat is starting to go away. I mean, for a really long time, I would have people, if they were diagnosed with any type of cardiovascular issue, if they had, whether it's high cholesterol or anything, they were just cutting everything out. They wouldn't have almonds. They wouldn't have peanut butter. They didn't use olive oil. Everything was fat-free. I'm not hearing that as much. I think that some of that intense fear of fat has started to wane. I think in part because of these diets. My recommendation is if someone's choosing to go the lower carb or even a keto type route, we can still really keep a focus on the plant-based fats.
I agree. The only thing I worry about on some of these keto type diets is that it's just too much protein, too much animal protein for many of them. Not all, I'm just saying, but sometimes I see people that all they're eating is bacon and pork rinds and whatever else I can think of. And that's just their sole consumption of food for the day. And you're going, oh my goodness, it's working in that you've eliminated carbs, but you're creating a new problem in the process.
And it's also what they're not getting. You were talking a little bit ago of the microbiome and the good bugs in our gut. that need that food and that nourishment, and that's fibers, So our
Yes.
fruits, our vegetables are the things that we're feeding those bugs with, and we're not getting that if we're doing such a low carb diet. So when we're talking about plant versus animal fats, our preference, and I know yours also is, let's go plant based fats when we can. When they are animal based, keeping it sea based or fish based, like you said. And then coconut oil. That one's kind of in the middle there because when we talk about saturated fats, we typically think of lard, butter, bacon, as you said. Coconut oil is plant based, but it's also a saturated fat and sort of falls in the middle. So tell us kind of your take on that.
Yeah, coconut oil does fall in the middle. It is a saturated fat, so let's just start there. And obviously, it can add a lot of flavor. And obviously, if you're going to put a saturated fat and use it in cooking, I would use it sparingly because it can add flavor. But the good part about coconut oil is that it contains, and it varies depending on the type of coconut oil. There's virgin, and then there's a lot of processed and hydrogenated and so forth, which you'd want to avoid. It has a reasonable amount of medium chain triglycerides, probably under 50%. Generally between 15 to 50, depending on what you're getting. And those tend to be helpful in that they don't lead to as much weight gain as, say, just pure fat does.
And the medium chain triglycerides you mentioned, sometimes you'll see it as MCT on something. And you'll see MCT oil marketed, which is really expensive. But that's one of the components of, it's about, as you said, about half of what coconut oil is. So yeah, tell us about how MCT oil is different. So
yeah, it basically, these are MCTs, or medium chain triglycerides, are basically man-made. They come naturally in certain types of things, but to get pure MCT, that is man-made. So they're taking it out of something else like coconut and processing it. If it's virgin, it tends to be your best product. And again, I would avoid hydrogenated anything. But the body handles these type of fats a little differently. So they're not as processed. They're easily absorbed into the body, and they're not stored the same way that conventional fats are. So MCTs, or medium chain triglycerides, can be beneficial in certain types of processes. I think the rule of thumb I would say with coconut oil is you don't have to run away from it. It's certainly better than butter or lard or a lot of other classic, saturated fats. And if you're going to use one, I would use it sparingly, and I would use it, it's very flavorful, so it could be valuable to you, but I wouldn't go on a diet high on coconut oil either.
One of the places that I like it and recommend to people is if they're baking, and of course not baking with flour and sugar, but if they're baking, I like to encourage things like almond flour, coconut flour, which are going to be higher fiber, higher protein, higher healthy fats. And then natural plant-based, no-calorie sweeteners. Here locally in New Orleans, we have Swerve, but other types of sweeteners that you can use in place of sugar that have no glycemic effect or don't have any calorie effect, but they're still natural. And then instead of butter in your favorite recipe, you can use coconut oil, cup for cup. And so there's a lot of times when you would say, well, I'm switching from butter to olive oil. And that makes a lot of sense if you're doing something in the skillet or you're preparing maybe your fish this way. But if you're baking, you need it to kind of have that body that butter has. And so those are kind of the recommendations. So using coconut oil, just like you would butter, cup for cup, is a really easy substitute in your favorite baked goods. But then take it further for me of doing the better flours, almond flour, watching your sugar. But that can even if you haven't remade any of your favorite recipes and you're listening to this and I make those favorite cookies I have or whatever. Even if that's the first step you do, that's kind of with recipe modifications and lifestyle change, it's dipping our toe in a step at a time. So even if that's just one change you're making of baking, okay. So we talked sodium, we talked carbs versus fat, and now talk to me about cholesterol. I know that this is one where people, they get their number, and we've been so ingrained that if your cholesterol is over 200, there's just like explosions happen around. And that's not necessarily the case. Tell us why.
So the cholesterol is made up of components, and the total number, I've always told patients, is the least important number. So if your number comes back 220 or something like that, I wouldn't,
Mine is always over 200.
And mine is too.
Because our HDL is high.
HDL is high. So let's just start off, it's one of those, mysteries of life that you find out when you're a child that there's actually a good witch, in Wizard of Oz, as opposed to I thought all witches were supposedly bad. And so it's much the same thing. There's actually good components of cholesterol that are really helpful. They actually reduce the likelihood and prevent heart disease. And then there's the bad ones. And so if I have lots of the good one, my total goes up. And if I have lots of the bad one, my total goes up. So the fact that your total cholesterol is a number, it's made up of all these things put together. And so it doesn't tell you much. So what I've always told patients is, I don't want to say it's worthless, at the extremes, either very low or very high, it has some value, but really, unless you give me the numbers underneath it, it's hard to you can't say whether that's good or bad. So we really need to know what the good cholesterol is, which is called high HDL or high density lipoprotein, what that number is, and then what the bad ones are, the LDL and the triglycerides. And then when we put those together, we can figure out what the total is, and then make sense whether or not you have a problem or you don't have a problem. You may actually have you're doing great. You have a high HDL. Your total is always going to be high the rest of your life. Don't worry about it. These are nice problems to have. So that's really the skinny on cholesterol.
And if someone is looking at cholesterol in food on that food label.
Yeah. So cholesterol in your body is not, so here's the deal. If you ate a gram of saturated fat, it'll raise your bad cholesterol twice as much as if you ate, the same amount of cholesterol. So cholesterol is something I wouldn't be overly worried about in the food.
And because it really has no impact on our cholesterol levels.
Very, very little. Very, very little. So I wouldn't be concerned about the total cholesterol in the food product. I'd be more worried about the fat in the food product, and specifically the type of fat, trans fatty acids in particular, and saturated fat as well. Those would be the things I'd be concerned about.
The new food label, has started to go into effect on a lot of products. It'll go into effect across the board next year. I wish that cholesterol would come off of that label. In fact, I thought it was off the new label because I was hoping it was. And then I looked and I'm like, oh, wait, no, it's still there. To me, it causes an element of confusion for people.
Yeah, people think that if there's cholesterol in the food, that means my cholesterol is going to for sure go up, and that's not the case for 99% of the things that we eat. So the things that'll drive your cholesterol up in a bad way are the saturated fat and the trans fat.
And if someone does have to take medications, well, you and I talked about this briefly before the podcast. If someone comes in and, okay, their LDL is high and medications might be the recommendation. When clients have come in and that LDL is high, but it's not what would be considered a life-threatening. It's high, and yeah, it needs to come down. I'll ask them, talk with your physician, see if you can get a 3-month window, and let's address it through diet and exercise. Because if they haven't really been changing diet and now they got this diagnosis, we can do a lot of benefit once we start taking certain things out and plugging in better things in those places. But if they're taking the medication at the same time they start all these lifestyle changes, you don't know how much did the impact did that lifestyle change have. So you and I talked about that, and that's one of those things that I've encouraged, and not telling a patient don't take the medication if you have to, but talk with your physician and see if this is an option that we could get a grace period of 3 months. What's your take on that? And what would be the threshold that you would say, yeah, that's okay, or we got to do something more aggressive?
There are certain situations where that's appropriate, and there are certain situations where it's not. And I'm not trying to complicate it. It's the God's truth. So if somebody just had a heart attack and they're coming out of the hospital and their cholesterol is whatever it is,
you got to do what you got to do.
You got to get on a statin now, because immediately the statin, regardless of what your cholesterol is going to have a benefit in terms of saving your life and preventing another heart attack. So we're not going to give you 3 months of grace.
We're not playing around,
no,
right?
We're not playing around. Or if we know that you've got, critical disease, et cetera, et cetera. So the situations where it doesn't mean we wouldn't push the diet, but we can't wait. We have to start you now. It's in your best interest. So the situations where that would be true are the ones I just mentioned. And the others would be in people that this is very unlikely, but people that have familial types of high cholesterol, in which case the diet, if your LDL is 250 or 300, high, then no matter what you do with your diet, it's not going to be enough. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be on a diet. It'll help a little bit, but it'll be a drop in the bucket. We've got to get you on drug therapy because you'll never get there.
They're just
diet.
genetically
It's genetically high. And actually in Louisiana, there's a high incidence of this genetic disorder in Cajuns, the French Canadians. So again, it's important that we be able to screen for that as well. But for those type of situations, I don't want to wait. And it's in the patient's best interest, the individual's best interest that we don't wait. Now, in somebody that just comes in and goes, hi, I'm a healthy person, or I think I am, but my cholesterol's been high and I wonder what I can do. And if their cholesterol was in the typical range that we see most humans, then we would agree with you totally. Let's see what you can do with dietary changes, with exercise, with lifestyle changes. Let us check it again in 3 to 6 months time and see how it's changed, and then we'll go from there depending on where it is.
And that also gives that person motivation to
Absolutely.
be diligent with it. And if they're given that window and they can't be diligent enough, or they're not being diligent enough, that's a lesson too. So if someone does have to get on cholesterol lowering medications, most commonly statins, there's several side effects that people don't like and they'll complain about. So what are some of the most common ones that you hear?
Honestly, there's not a lot. There's really only a couple, and it's really just, it has to do with muscle.
That's the one
muscle
that,
aches.
yeah.
There's a lot of things that are myths about statins that are not true.
It's muscle, and people perceive it as joint, I guess, because of muscle.
So it really doesn't cause memory losses, for instance. It doesn't cause sleep disturbance. It doesn't cause, there's a lot of things that it doesn't do that was somehow mythically associated with it. It doesn't cause cataracts. I mean, we go down the list.
I didn't know that some of those were.
Yeah. Initially, in fact, when the first statin came out, we were concerned about, because of some animal tests, that it would cause cataracts. And that we had to check for, there was all kinds of stuff that went on back in those days. But nevertheless, really, it comes down to, in a rare case, some liver issues, but it's very rare. Which you probably won't have any symptoms to. The only symptom really at the end of the day is going to be muscle-related aches and pains. Again, those tend to be dose-related, and they tend to be more common in certain types of statins versus others, and it also depends on any other drugs that you're taking at the same time. So there's a lot of things that can factor into that.
Which statins are more prone to causing it?
So the lipid-soluble statins are more prone to it than what are called the water-soluble statins. So pravastatin is water-soluble, is less likely to happen. Rosuvastatin is less likely for this, which is Crestor, is less likely for this to happen. It's more common in some of the lipid-soluble statins, the original ones like Mevacor and Zocor, which is simvastatin and lovastatin. And then Lipitor is sort of in between. Atorvastatin. So, I can tell you that in low doses of rosuvastatin, which is Crestor, the rate of myalgia or muscle aches is the same as placebo. It's exactly the same. So it doesn't increase muscle aches.
And if someone does experience it or perceives that they're experiencing it, what are some things that you recommend that they can do to help remedy it?
Well, the first thing I do when patients tell me they're having it is I stop the drug and I see what happens. I'm not on a statin, and I'll do something stupid.
Oh, we can all have it, yeah.
And I get muscle aches all the time.
Yes.
Okay, and so the first thing is it really due to the aging? Because things just get blamed all the time. It doesn't mean that it can't do it. It's just that sometimes it's just,
How long would they have to be off of it how long do you let it?
What I usually do is I'll give it 4 to 6 weeks off of it. Honestly, between us, if you stop it, it'll be out of your system within a matter of days. But I'll just overkill it and say, listen, generally, unless you had a heart attack or something, there's no emergency here. We can stop it, and then we'll just see what happens.
Take a month, 6 weeks.
Take a month, 6 weeks, and let's just track and see what happens. And then you go, it's gotten better. Well, it could have gotten better on its own. Let's re-challenge. Okay, so then we put you back on it. That fulfills what's called Koch's postulate. And if you re-challenge and it comes right back the same way that it was before, then you can say, okay, it is the drug. And so we'd want to look at other drugs that you're taking that could potentially influence that, or the type of statin you're on, or, a lower dose or things like that. So those would be the first things that we do. I can tell you that for most patients, not everybody, I don't want to say this is true all the time, but for many patients, it turns out it's not the statin. That's not true for everybody. And obviously, when I use them on a water-soluble statin, it rarely becomes the statin. It's more common in the older days when we had these heavy simvastatins and things like that are more lipid soluble. But what I'm saying is it's not zero. So obviously there are people that do truly have this, and it is due to the statin, and we have to look for the safest statin that we could use in them if we're going to use a statin to try and avoid this.
And CoQ10, what do you feel the role?
Yeah, so CoQ10 in clinical trials have not worked out. I can tell you in personal experience that I've seen some responses from CoQ10, but but it's been tested now in clinical trials, and it has not shown to be overall of benefit. There's really no harm to CoQ10. I wouldn't just say take it just for the heck of it.
And that's coenzyme Q10, but usually you would buy it in supplement form and you see it as CoQ10.
Correct.
And I typically, because again, kind of placebo effect, and if someone feels they're experiencing muscle pains, okay, well, let's take the CoQ10 because it might be helpful. And as you said, there's no benefit and there's no drawback and there's other benefits. And I'll usually recommend about 100 milligrams.
Yeah, generally that's how I start off. You can go between 100 to 200 milligrams, but I would start with 100 milligrams, daily and just see what happens. I have had people, feel better on it. So I don't want to say it's not going to work. I'm just saying that when we've put this to a clinical trial, we didn't see a traditional benefit, but all of us have, individuals that either whether it's through placebo or otherwise have felt better on it. So in those scenarios, when I've ruled out everything else, I've got you on the least likely statin to cause an issue at the low dose that I can get away with, that's the lowest dose possible, et cetera, and I still have nowhere to go, then that would be certainly something I would do.
And on the topic of supplements, what do you take personally?
I don't take any supplements personally.
No vitamins or anything?
Nothing. But I do live with a kind of I live what I preach in terms of diet.
Right.
So I don't feel like I need a supplement because, I kind of live off a Mediterranean, basically a pescatarian Mediterranean diet.
And I do largely as well. I take certain supplements more for an insurance, and I find that, even though I'll rotate, I like the same foods a lot. And so I do try to rotate the produce and what's in season and what's being prepared. But we have our favorites that we settle into. So I do those as a preventative. And in spite of kind of the mixed research on omega-3 supplements, and in spite of the fact that I eat an awful lot of salmon, I still take omega-3 supplements. I have personally just, a lot of overuse injuries, hip injuries, muscle things. So for me, I kind of pile in everything that would have a potential anti-inflammatory effect possible. And then are there supplements that you recommend to your patients?
Well, I try and inquire about their diet. And obviously some people are a little more adherent to a good diet than others. In those that are not, I will use omega-3 supplements, frequently. So, it's not like, it's just that I probably can have gills pretty soon. I have so much, seafood in my diet. So I don't think, I've actually had mine drawn and it's like off the chart. So,
I wanted to ask you about that too, about the lab tests that someone can get to check their omega-3 levels. Tell us about that.
They're not going to be covered by insurance. They're generally pretty expensive.
In what range? Like
it could be a couple $100.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a $10 or $20 test. So I don't know that I would just say to people, go ahead and get it checked. Unless they just, want to spend that kind of money. But honestly, if you're having, there's good data on this. If you're having 3 to 4 seafood type of meals per week, then you're probably getting enough, omega-3. Now, obviously, let's define not all seafoods all the same. So, some people
fried shrimp po' boy,
fried shrimp po' boy, or actually even worse, a catfish, or if you go to any fish fillet at a McDonald's or Burger King, you're not going to get zero omega-3. Actually, we studied this, and there's nothing in there. So you're basically getting a chicken that swims.
And I think that's a really great point. When we talk about eating fish to get omega-3s, it's the oily fish. So if you have a really light, white, flaky fish that has very little oils in it, you're not getting a lot of omega-3s.
You're not getting as much. That is correct. So the fattier the fish, then the more omega-3.
I'll have people that look at calories because, at places like Costco, you can buy the salmon and the fillets packaged, and they'll say, well, the salmon has 240 calories, but the tilapia has 80. And that will sway them to the tilapia. But for all these other reasons, as you said earlier, the satiating effect of the fats, the anti-inflammatory effects, these omega-3s in there, there's so many reasons to do that. And so simply being led by calories is not a good idea.
Totally. And you want the more cold water the fish, the better, because obviously the more, it's just like Eskimos, the more cold water, the more fat stores that we would have to be able to protect us from the cold. And so that's the beneficial fat that we would seek. You'll still get some omega-3 fats from, at least not farm raised necessarily, but from less cold water fish, like you mentioned. Farm raised fish can go both ways. It depends on what we feed them in the farm. So again, if there are certain farms that feed them cornmeal, in which case you get zero. If they're feeding them phytoplankton and typical,
Algae.
yeah, then they're getting the right stuff. So farm can be good and farm can be bad. It just depends on what they feed them in the farm because, basically you eat what they eat.
And that's hard for us as consumers to know because we'll see it listed as farmed. And when you see the wild caught version of a lot of it, it can be exorbitantly expensive.
Yes. So, you just have to be able to hopefully, the ideal scenario is that you're going to a produce market or something, and there's the fish guy that shows up and he just caught this that morning and, bingo. And of course, if it doesn't smell rancid to you, you know it's fresh. That's the other way you can tell. And that's ideal. And then if you work your way down, then ideally your grocer is purchasing from farms that are doing it the right way. And you can always ask your grocer if they are.
Exactly. When they have the seafood counter, the fishmonger there. Yeah. If they're knowledgeable, or even if they don't know.
They should be inquiring.
Yes.
If they're not asking, then that's not the grocery store you probably want to go to.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so still on the topic of protein, let's talk about processed meats. So things of bacon, sausage, even there's a lot of them that people feel like they're doing better because it's turkey bacon, it's chicken sausage, but they're still not good. And tell us about this.
I think the first thing to know is that, and people sometimes are surprised to hear this, is that if we talk about meats, and again, mammalian meats, so, whether it's pork or veal or, beef, processed meats are those that we all know what they are, like sausages and frankfurters and things like that. Those are class 1 carcinogens. So what are class 1 carcinogens? This is a designation by the World Health Organization. This is not. So the World Health Organization, let me just start off by saying it tends to not be as exposed to lobbying groups as, say, the USDA. Okay, who's going to have?
It's a very gentle way of saying.
It's a nice way of saying that, but you get the idea. Sometimes lobbyists get in the way of the public interest. So the WHO, I'm not saying they're always perfect, but at least for this, they tend to be more interested in just what's nutritionally correct for the public good. And they've created a list of class 1 and class 2 and so forth carcinogens, which means these things cause cancer. For instance, cigarette smoking and asbestos are class 1 carcinogens. Guess what else is a class 1 carcinogen? Processed meats. So the bacon that you can consume, or the sausages or the hot dogs. These are all processed meats, and they are class 1 carcinogens, meaning they cause cancer. And the types of cancer typically are mostly colorectal. So again, if you're a male and doesn't smoke, and the most common cancer is colorectal, and then followed by prostate. And if you're a female that doesn't smoke, the most common cancers are typically breast and colorectal. So these are high frequency cancers that are directly related to a variety of things, including, what we eat. Now, other red meats that are not processed are class 2 carcinogens, which means there's a high likelihood of increasing colorectal cancer. And that's just plain red meat, period, not necessarily having to be processed, so to speak, that they go through. So the first thing I would tell people is that, this is not just heart attacks now. Now, we'll talk about heart attacks in a minute, but these are things that cause cancer. And we always think of somebody, you hear your neighbor down the street or somebody, oh my God, he's got cancer or she's got cancer. And we just think it's one of those things like, okay, tree landed in my house. I had nothing to do with this. It just happened at random. And these things are not necessarily random. You may be doing things to yourself unwittingly that may be producing this, and we have to be cautious about that.
So what about the cured meats that are made without nitrites or nitrates?
Well, again,
or sausages or bacons.
Curing to anything that's in the class 1 includes curing. So
whether or not it has nitrites.
Whether or not it has nitrates or not. So any curing process is part of the processing that takes place, and the curing is done in order to avoid bacteria and have shelf life. That's why we cure these things.
And so I think the takeaway for our listeners there is using, if you love these things and it makes you like very sad to think that you're not having them, it's not that you don't ever have them, but use them as garnish or an accessory, an accompaniment. You can have the thinnest slices of something as that little topping, but you don't have to have the platter full. Dr. Milani's face is like, oh no, he doesn't even want us to have a sprinkle or a slice.
I don't have a whiff of cigarettes every now and again.
Right, that's true. I don't have just one cigarette.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously one cigarette's a whole lot better than a pack.
I think I'm a softie on that, because when you try to tell someone We shouldn't ever, and I don't love the word should. I don't like the word should or shouldn't. And it's a really hard thing for someone to think that for the rest of my life I can't. So I
And I
kind of
never,
bend on
but
it.
yeah. So the difference is that I never tell people you shouldn't. I just say, look, it's a class 1 carcinogen. Do whatever you want to do. Enjoy yourself. Double up. I mean, what I'm saying is my job is to inform you.
Do you know, I was at the drugstore the other day checking out, and side note on this, I admire that CVS doesn't sell cigarettes anymore.
Yeah,
Walgreens still does. It was a Walgreens. The guy in front of me he worked at a Krispy Kreme, and he apparently had ridden his bike there because he had a box of Krispy Kreme donuts. I thought, why does he have this at the checkout at Walgreens? I realized he was on his bike, and he bought whatever kind of processed meats from the refrigerator at Walgreens.
Perfect.
And I counted 15 packs of cigarettes, lined them up on the counter. And I thought, you just rode your bike from the donut shop. You're carrying your donuts. You just got your processed meats and 15 packs of cigarettes. And it was about 6 a.m.
And this is why I'm in business, So I mean, I don't want to be in business, but this is why I'm still in business.
It was stunning.
It's awful.
Yeah, and I thought, a pack of cigarettes, people are going to do that, but when he just kept pulling them,
just pile on.
Yeah.
And again, there's going to be somebody in the audience that's going to say, my grandpa used to eat 10 pounds of bacon. There's always going to be exceptions. Yeah. I mean, there are people that just no matter what you do to them, nothing's going to happen, and that's okay. I mean, I'm thrilled. I vote. That's great. I wish I knew I could do that. But the odds are, that's why we have all this data. I mean, the odds are very clear from a population perspective that unless you defy the odds, these things happen.
So Molly's take will have the chicken sausage, nitrate, no nitrates, no nitrites, and smaller amounts of it throughout our red beans. Dr. Milani just gives us the eye and says, well, it's class 1 carcinogen. Do what you want.
Enjoy yourself.
Enjoy your one cigarette.
Yeah.
Let's talk about weight. You and I have also talked. Oh, and then TMAO. We forgot.
So meat, not necessarily processed meat, just red meat. So let's go back to this. So we know that red meat can increase not only cancer risk but heart attack risk, and the mechanism by which it happens typically is through a horrible compound that our bacteria produce, called trimethylamine N oxide, which is basically TMAO, just for abbreviation. And so this is produced by our gut bacteria. And there's a couple of great studies out there, but the point is that higher levels of this, the more red meat you eat, the higher levels you have in your body, and the higher level you have in your body, it causes plaques to get inflamed in your arteries, it causes plaque formation, and it causes them to rupture, which leads to heart attacks. So it's the whole chain. If you take vegans as an example that, don't eat any red meat at all, haven't had red meat in, X number of years, and you gave them a steak to eat, their TMAO production is 0. You measure it before, it's 0. You measure it after, it's 0. If you give a person that eats meat
regularly,
on occasion, and now you give them that same steak, their TMAO baseline is, say, at a low level, and then boom, it goes up dramatically. If you now take that person that eats red meat and you give them a course of a certain type of antibiotic that kills all that bacteria, and you gave them the steak, then it's 0 again. So what that tells you is this: that the vegan doesn't have that bacteria that they can't make the TMAO, even though they just ate the steak. Does that mean that vegans can eat steak? Well, if they just started eating steak, they wouldn't be vegans anymore, and then they'd eventually get that bacteria, which again would then get them the TMAO, which then would get them the problem.
I can only imagine that study. You've got all these very intense vegans who have been vegan and passionate about it, and then they're volunteering themselves to eat a steak for the study.
Yep.
I guess in the name of science.
In the name of science, and with a fat check associated with it. I'm sure we can buy you or your way through it. But the point is that, just the one time, that's exactly it. And it's all, the point of this whole study was to prove that this is all done through the bacteria, and that the right kind of diet changes that bacteria composition so that you don't get these bad things. And the wrong kind of diet, the more of that wrong diet you have, the higher levels you have.
Which helps us drive home even more of the why. We hear this about red meat, we hear it about processed meats. Okay, we know produce is good for us, but these types of discoveries of this help us understand the why this is. And then weight, that's the final. I think you and we both agree that there's a lot of extreme weight loss diets out there that they're focusing just on weight. And you're extremely passionate. Don't confuse just losing weight with being healthier.
Yeah, let me just start off by making sure we don't give the wrong message here, and that is, overweight and obese is not a good thing for the health. And if we can get people to a closer to their ideal body weight, the better you are. So I'm not against weight loss for people that need to lose weight. I'm for that. What I worry about is that, some of the extremes that people do to get there, some of which can be very unhealthy, and moreover, they don't tend to have long-lasting effects. What I'd rather do is, if I can get to the ideal weight, let's just make up a scenario. I can get there in a year, or I can get there in 3 months, just to pretend. I'd rather get there in a year and have learned a new way of eating and lifestyle that allow me to still be there a year after and a year after and a year after, because now I've developed habits over a year, than going on some kind of a non-sustainable diet that I could do for 3 months and lose all this weight. And then I bounce back maybe 6 months or 9 months later, and I haven't learned a new habit. So one, it has to do with habit formation. And two, it has to do with, what's a healthy thing to do? So again, we talked about, I can tell you that if you just ate, as an example, let's just pretend I lived off of pork rinds and bacon, and that's all I consume for the next 3 months, I will lose a bunch of weight. And am I healthier for it? Well, you've lost some weight, which is a good thing, but you're probably worse off. And now I've got TMAO off the chart, and I got this and that and the other, polycyclic hydrocarbons that have been formed. And, these are things that can cause cancer. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that have happened, that probably is maybe unhealthier. So the point is, what we want to do is be able to get people on a healthy diet that achieves weight loss in people that need to lose weight, that creates a habit so that they can stay on this healthy diet in perpetuity and not bounce back. That's the ideal scenario.
I think using that as it's not just about what we're removing from the diet. It's not just about what we're taking out, but also as much or more focusing on what we're replacing those things with. So we're removing the things that not only are keeping the weight on, but also are not good because they're white carbs, they're sugars, they're whatever fast food that's keeping the weight on, also inflammatory, all of this. Okay, but focusing more on what are we going to put it in? Because if you think, okay, I'm going to try to get this many servings of salmon or avocado or, vegetables, and you're focusing on getting these in through your day, your Greek yogurt to get your probiotics. And if your focus is how many of these good things can I put in, you're edging out the other stuff too.
Correct.
So, finally, what are some of the key markers? We've talked a lot of numbers, and we've talked about, a lot with cardiovascular health and whole body health. But if someone's listening to this and they say, okay, I haven't been for my annual physical in a while, or I need to get in there, what are the things for people to, when we're talking about, don't just let the headlines dictate us, don't let ourselves get distracted by the stuff that doesn't matter. What are the numbers that matter that someone should really keep as their priority? Now, I know it varies, but when we talk about the average healthy person walking in.
Well, there's a lot. Obviously, if you can get your blood pressure checked, that's important. I mean, the most common chronic disease in the world and in the United States is high blood pressure. It's probably 40% of every adult that walks around has high blood pressure. So that'd be an important number to find out, especially since it's almost half of every adult that has one. And again, we'd like you to have a good blood pressure. So that'd be a key number, I think. I certainly would recommend to any individual get their cholesterol profile checked, and not just their total, but what's called the entire lipid profile or the entire cholesterol profile, where all the three components, the HDL, the LDL, and the triglycerides are.
And yearly.
And I would recommend, obviously, if we already know up front that, Molly Kimball's cholesterol is, 100 and, 210, of which, 89 or 90 is HDL, and her LDL is really low and that kind of stuff, and nothing's changed in her, then, you could probably go every few years. But certainly there'd be no harm in getting it done annually. You'd want to know what your blood sugar is, your fasting blood sugar. So what is your glucose level in your body? Because again, diabetes is a very common problem.
And a very silent problem.
And a very silent problem, just like hypertension. It's also a very silent problem. So unless you get it checked, you're not going to know that you have it. So elevated blood sugar is going to be very important as well. There are other things, but the problem is in how you interpret these other things, like inflammatory markers. Because, for instance, if I worked out too much, or Molly overdid it and she has, a knee injury, and it's really, she has to calm herself down and go swim now instead of, jump up and down or run on a treadmill too hard. then that knee is going to create inflammation that's going to falsely elevate your inflammatory markers. So some of those the other issues I think are tough to interpret for the average person out there, and it might not be worth doing, as you might get falsely concerned inappropriately. I think if you wanted to keep it simple, I'd look at my weight, I'd look at my blood pressure, my blood sugar, and my cholesterol. And if I can get just those things done, that would be a tremendous set of things to follow.
And most of us work well with routine or pattern or some sort of consistency. So if it's every birthday or if it's some marker every year that this is what it is. A lot of people's work, they're at their offices, they do screenings, but if that's not the case, and if your office does a screening, do it. Not everyone takes advantage of that.
The other good news is that it's now getting, it's going to, in the very near, I'm talking about even now, it's outside the point where we can get all these things at home. You don't have to go anywhere. You can, there's that, we're almost within a year or two, you can get, you can order a home test kit and get your blood sugar and cholesterol checked. Certainly you can check your blood pressure at home. So all these kind of things you can do on your own now. You don't necessarily have to go and make an appointment and, go through all that if that's too inconvenient.
So the four kind of markers we'll look at: weight, blood pressure, lipid profile or cholesterol there, and blood sugar levels.
Yes.
And then finally, your takeaway message for people, if there's kind of, there's a lot of information we covered.
I think the takeaway message is really twofold. Number one is I eat well. and what I mean by that is I'm not deprived in anything. It's like one good tasting thing after another. It's not like I'm going away, oh God, this is just awful. So eating a healthy diet can be just as tasty, if not more tasty, than eating a bad diet. So I don't want people to feel like this is a deprivation. I would look at it just the opposite. So that's the first thing. And secondly, it would be basically, eat real food. So what's real food? It's stuff that's, grown locally. It's stuff that's, vegetables and, more plant-based, but don't eat processed stuff. Try and eat more real food. And the less processing, the better.
And it's often cheaper too. Well, fantastic information. Thank you so much for spending such a chunk of time with us. It's been a wealth of information. I think we've tackled a lot of these headlines, and I will put the link to the Ochsner site that has your information, contact information, and about the work that you do there. So if someone has questions or wants to see where to find more information, we will have that in the podcast notes. Thanks, Dr. Milani.
Thanks so much, Molly.
So a huge thank you to Dr. Milani for spending the time with us today, digging into the facts behind the hype. I hope you learned from us. I hope you enjoyed our conversation as I did. And you can find the links that we mentioned in the show notes of this episode. I'm Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life possible.